Hello, this is Steve from SDRplay. In today's video I'm going to go through basic installation, troubleshooting and setup of an RSP with the SDR Uno software. So primarily this is intended for new users of the RSP and SDR Uno, or maybe current users would like to follow through the basic troubleshooting steps if you find at some point your RSP is no longer working. On the other hand, if you've already got your RSP set up and you're using it successfully, there's probably nothing here of benefit to you, so just move on to the more advanced videos. In this video we're going to cover basic software installation and mention some of the more common issues that some people encounter when performing the installation. I'll also discuss briefly USB and signal connections to the RSP, and then show the basic software settings in Uno to verify correct operation of the RSP. This video features the RSP 1A and SDR Uno, but the concepts apply to all the RSP models and to some extent to other software packages such as HD SDR and SDR console from a troubleshooting standpoint. If you want a more in-depth discussion of program features, that can be found in the user manual and in other instructional videos available from our website at SDRplay.com. So in the course of this video, first we will look at installing the SDR Uno software. Then we'll look at the hardware connections to the RSP, comprising the USB connection to your PC and some sort of antenna connection. And then finally we'll look at using SDR Uno to verify basic reception and be sure that everything is working correctly. So first up, we'll look at installing the software. We have now downloaded the SDR Uno installer program and started to run it. We just follow through the instructions, accepting the agreement, and it should proceed fairly speedily. Now at this point we're prompted to connect our RSP and allow the driver to install. Sometimes people ask how long it takes for the driver to install. It usually happens pretty instantaneously. Sometimes you see a brief icon appearing in the taskbar at the bottom of the screen, but more often than not you don't see anything. So now we've finished setup and we can start SDR Uno. All is working well, and the SDR Uno windows pop up on your screen. But what happens if there was a problem during the installation? One problem is if the RSP hardware drivers are not successfully installed. In that case, when you start to try SDR Uno, you'll get a message similar to this. No available RSPs found, check USB cables, device drivers, or if the RSP is in use by another application. So what do you do next? Well, the first step whenever you see that message is to call up Device Manager. And by looking in Device Manager you will see a wealth of information. If things are working correctly, the RSP should show up under Sound, Video and Game Controllers. Sometimes, if the installation has not proceeded correctly, instead of the RSP popping up in its allotted spot, you may see something show up as an unknown device, or it may show up correctly under Sound, Video and Game Controllers but with an exclamation mark showing something untoward has happened. In that case, right click on the device, open up Properties, and under Device Status you will see a message which gives you some indication of what the problem might have been. Now most frequently you will get a message saying something like drivers were not installed. I know in Windows 7 you get a message about digital signing, and that's an indication you have to install the Microsoft security patch, and that's detailed in an app note on our website that talks about optimizing Windows 7 for use with the RSPs. Sometimes you may see a code 30, and one thing I'd like to stress at this point, until the RSP shows up successfully in Device Manager, there is absolutely no point in trying to run SDR Uno. Other times you may see a message pop up saying unknown device. Wherever unknown device pops up, you can right click on it, select uninstall device, delete the driver software and uninstall, and then you can try running the SDR Uno installer again and see if it's recognized correctly on that occasion. So the first step is always to look in Device Manager, and when and only when you see the RSP1A showing up successfully is it worth trying to go into SDR Uno and running the program. At this point, I'd like to say a few words about USB cables. The type of cable used, anything from USB-A to USB-B. Typically these printers and scanners come with cables just like this. You probably have a drawer full, and anything as long as it meets the USB 2.0 specification will connect your RSP successfully to SDR Uno. Now you may have heard mention of cables that have ferrite cores either on one end or the other. That will have no effect on the ability to connect your RSP to SDR Uno. However, in some cases people have reported interference being coupled from their PC through the USB cable into the RSP1. So the ferrite cores may help out in that situation, but it certainly will have no effect on your ability to connect the RSP to SDR Uno. So let's review the USB connection issues. The first thing is to listen to see if the chimes happen when your RSP is plugged in. These are the same chimes that you get from Windows every time you plug in a USB device. If you do not hear those chimes, that is an indication that maybe you have a bad USB cable or possibly even a bad USB port. And one way to verify this is to plug another USB device in and see if that operates correctly. So something like a camera, a phone, or perhaps a flash drive will verify whether or not the USB port is working. Some users have reported problems using USB 3.0 ports, although I've not been able to verify that. So if you have the option, try using a USB 2.0 port instead. And finally, if you're using an external USB hub, try bypassing the hub for troubleshooting purposes and connect the RSP directly to your PC. Secondly, if unknown device shows up in Device Manager, then check your antivirus software logs and see if perhaps anything has been quarantined within that. Update the definitions for your antivirus software and or disable that software and try running the installer again and see if the RSP shows up correctly. And thirdly, if the RSP does show up in Device Manager but has some form of warning triangle next to it, right-click on the device and select Properties, and you will get further clues as to what the problem may be. In the case of Windows 7, ensure that the Microsoft security patch has been applied. This is detailed in the Optimizing for Windows 7 app note on our website. Also, for Windows 10, ensure that all the latest Windows updates have been installed, and particularly for systems which have been upgraded from, say, Windows 7 or Windows 8 to Windows 10, check with your PC manufacturer that you have the latest hardware drivers. A lot of hardware drivers broke on systems that were upgraded to Windows 10. And once you've done that, uninstall the driver, right-click on it and select Uninstall, and try running the SDR Uno installer again and see if the RSP shows up correctly. And I stress once again, until the RSP appears in Device Manager, there is no point in trying to run SDR Uno or any of the other SDR softwares you may be interested in running. So at this point, we've successfully installed SDR Uno and verified that the RSP1 is indeed connected to the device. And we can also verify this using the Options button in the SDR Uno main window. And we can do About, and we will see we're running version 1.23 of the software. I have an RSP1A connected, and there is the serial number of my device. The Options menu is also useful if you're hopelessly lost and think you've messed up every setting and want to get back to the beginning. You can click on Reset to Default Settings, and that will get you back to the starting position with SDR Uno. Furthermore, if you go down lower, you'll see there's a link to the user manual, and indeed the user manual was installed at the time you installed SDR Uno, and you can call up the manual at any time from this menu and get further information about operation of the software. Now, one question we're often asked is, this is all a little bit bewildering, so where does a layman start? Someone that doesn't know SDR terms, doesn't know what an SDR is. And in fact, it's really not that difficult. If you have a basic knowledge of radios, you'll see a lot of aspects to this that are fairly familiar. Now, when SDR Uno opens initially, it will open as many windows as it can to fill your screen. And maybe initially this is a little daunting, so let's see what we can close down. We have a record function. Okay, we don't need to record anything initially to verify working, so we can close that window. We have the memory panel. We don't need to worry about memories at this point either, so we can close that. And then finally there's the EX control panel, which lets you do lots of things like manually adjusting noise blanking, noise reduction, CW peak detection, notch filter settings, and so on. Again, we don't need any of that initially, so we can close that window down too. So at the end of the day, we're left with the Uno main window, which is very important because it has the play button that starts things going. It has an RF gain function here, which by default is RF attenuation. So the higher up this slider is, the more attenuation is there. The lower it is, the higher the gain. This is also where you can engage notch filters for broadcast bands, medium wave and FM. And if you're in countries where DAB is used, you can also notch out DAB as well. The next window to look at is the RX control. This shows the frequency we're tuned to. It shows the mode, and these should be familiar to any radio operator: AM, FM, double sideband, lower sideband, upper sideband. We have sub-modes for FM. We have some CW specific settings, and then for each mode there are various filter characteristics. Then in the main window we show an RF spectrum and the waterfall, and then an amplified version of this will appear in the auxiliary spectrum window up here. So before we get going, the first thing we need to do is connect some form of antenna to our RSP so we can verify it's operating correctly. Now a few words about antenna connections. Although there's no substitute for a properly installed outside antenna for best reception using your RSP, it's by no means essential to check out basic operation of the device. One of the things I use here is, this is actually an old remote control antenna from a satellite dish. I use that. It has a basic F connector on the end. I use that with an adapter to go from F to the SMA connector we see on the end of the RSP1. Another useful connector, particularly for hams, goes from a SO239, which matches up with a lot of the cables people tend to use for HF, to an SMA male connector on the other end, which in turn goes into the RSP. Now, one thing that I learned fairly recently is that the SO239 is actually a perfect size to accommodate a banana plug, which in this case is connected to my somewhat infamous blue wire antenna, which is a random length of wire that I found in my junk box that I use for quick testing the RSPs, or indeed as an antenna when I'm traveling. The far end of the antenna has an alligator clip, so I can clip it to a window frame or something else in my hotel room, and that's perfectly adequate for receiving, let's say, the stronger shortwave stations. So either one of these approaches is very suitable for checking out the RSP. You won't get the optimum performance, but certainly it's adequate for checking out the device, for example using local broadcast stations, AM broadcast or FM broadcast. Now, another problem sometimes encountered by people is they say they get no signals at all. And I suspect that one reason may be there are a number of small right angle or straight whip style antennas which come with supposedly an SMA connector on the end, but I don't know if you can see this very well, but the center pin is there. This is a male SMA plug, and that's required to mate with the female side mounted on the RSP. check your antenna when you've got it and make sure the center pin is present, or obviously no signal will get into the device. Furthermore, sometimes people use a similar adapter to this, but in the form of a pigtail, which is kind of nice. It gives some mechanical relief to your RSP. So there will be a short length of wire running from the SMA connector on one side to the SO239 on the other. But this is something else worth checking, is check for continuity between the center pin on that side and the center socket on the SO239. It's not unknown for such pigtail adapters to not have continuity, and that will leave you scratching your head for a long time. So now we'll try hooking up these antennas to the RSP and see what sort of performance we get. So now we have our antenna connected. In this case I'm using the blue wire antenna just sitting on the desktop beside me. We can start the software. Now, by default the SDR Uno starts at 3.5 megahertz. I'm going to hit the mute button here so we don't have to listen to that. And not surprisingly, I'm not seeing any signals there, so let's move down to the AM broadcast band to verify that the RSP is working. So I'll go to the RX control window, left click on the frequency display and type in a 1. The software adds 3 zeros to get me started, so that takes me to 1 kilohertz. Put another 0, 10 kilohertz, another 100 kilohertz, and finally one more takes me to 1 megahertz. Press return, and here we can see the AM broadcast band in all its glory. 1080 is a strong local station. I can use the mouse wheel to fine tune to 1080 exactly. I'll unmute the signal, and there you can see it. So basically for AM broadcast we're using the AM mode. We're starting off with a 6 kilohertz filter, and that's reflected by a slightly darker band either side of the red tuning cursor, which indicates the bandwidth of the signal. It also appears in amplified form in the auxiliary spectrum window up here, which you see is centered at 0 and goes plus or minus 3 kilohertz for a 6 kilohertz bandwidth. If I increase the bandwidth to 20 kilohertz, that makes it that much easier to see the darker band indicating the spectrum that we're tuned to, and also the auxiliary spectrum now goes plus or minus 10 megahertz. So that's all it took to verify that the RSP was working on AM broadcast stations. So the next step is to verify frequencies, higher frequencies, for example VHF. So now I'm going to retune to the FM broadcast band, and again I'll left click on the display. I want to tune to about 100 megahertz, and I'm going to use the shorthand way of doing that. So I'm going to type in 100 and then press the M key, and that takes me straight to 100 megahertz. I could have equally used the megahertz button here, and indeed the numeral digits if I wanted to click on the screen. So at 100 megahertz we're still only looking at a 2 megahertz slice of the spectrum, and that's a function of the sample rate we used here. So it would be better for FM if we looked at a 5 megahertz chunk of the spectrum. We get to see more stations that way. And indeed here at 101.1 is a local classical music station, so we can tune into that. We set the mode now to FM. The sub mode is stereo wide FM, and the filter is 192 kilohertz. And let's see if we can hear anything going on there. And sure enough, we can hear the FM station coming through there. So I can mute him again. You may have seen me adjust the RF attenuation. If you have a decent antenna connected, you probably will need to raise this slider up and attenuate the signal somewhat, because there will be a tendency to overload the input when you have a good antenna. It's not an issue with just my piece of wire, but sometimes when you move the attenuation all the way to the bottom, you'll get ADC overload warnings showing up on the screen here. So another way of doing the tuning, now that we've verified it works, is to use the bands that are pre-built into the software. So for example, if I select the ham lower band, now I have access directly to the 40 meter band. And although I'm not expecting to see much of a signal, By clicking on the 40 meter band, the software will automatically pick a sample rate and decimation value such that the band now fits 7.0 to 7.3 megahertz, fits exactly within the RF spectrum window. And you'll notice the software has also selected lower sideband, and that's indicated here by the gray band just appearing to the left of the tuning cursor, and ditto up in the auxiliary spectrum, 0 to -3 kilohertz. So that's basically a quick introduction to the using the SDR Uno software with your RSP and verifying that it's working. There is a lot more to be discovered about using the software. It has lots of capabilities. You will recall I mentioned going to the user manual, which can be accessed from within the software. And another great place to go is to visit our website. And if you go to the downloads page, that will take you to a page where you can download all the different types of software. But look over here on the documentation side. In addition to the user manuals, there is a section called App Notes, and there's lots of useful app notes for using your RSP. And under Video Guides and Media, there's a selection of, there's actually a link here which will take you to our YouTube channel. There's also a link up here. If you still have difficulties, use the Contact tab on our website, and this will enable you to set up a support ticket, and one of us will be pleased to answer any questions you have. If possible, we recommend that you use screenshots to illustrate what's going on in the software. They say a picture says 1,000 words, and indeed when it comes to debugging issues with software, it helps us immensely. Thank you for watching. We hope you found this video useful, and once again, for further information, please visit our website at www.sdrplay.com.